Take it away, Dr. Nelson.
Thank you. We're already started, but I just want to thank everyone for all their participation in getting us here today. Um, I want us to look at why now is the Black cowboy culture rising to the forefront of American popular culture. Again, the Afro Frontier thesis suggests intersectional Blackness emerges in moments of chaos, particularly during times of epic displays of Americanized violence. When in season, they ride as the tip of the spear. Today, we shine light on a section of Black folks who intentionally segregated themselves in order to deliver on their ancestral striving beyond freedom and into sovereignty. The summer of 2020 began with racial violence similar to the assaults perpetuated during the summer of 1919, a period often referred to as Red Summer. Black people on horseback, born and raised in Compton, was a vivid show of anti racist force. June 9th, 2020, Black cowboys and cowgirls from Compton graced the pages of the New York Times under the headline Evoking History, Black Cowboys Take to the Streets. For those who grew up in the hub city, it was more of our reality. Leaving the Afro frontier to occupy space in places like Southern California, Harlem, Oakland, Detroit, to engage America's roaring 20s, Black cowboys continued to maintain a vibrant culture amongst themselves. A historical narrative sickness has concealed a brief period at the turn of the 20th century when Black people realized their ancestral strivings behind the Du Boisian veil of double consciousness. Blackdom was a real place located in the southeastern section of the New Mexico Territory. The Afro Frontier town was part of a Black colonization movement that operated on a continuum influenced by ministers, military men, and Black Freemasons. After the Plessy decision in 1896 established the separate but equal doctrine, Black institutions evolved to take advantage by encouraging a separate and equal response. Blackdom was a real place that started with an inherited idea. The Afro frontier town manifested at the turn of the 20th century for African descendants under the conditions of American Blackness. The idea for Blackdom developed throughout the 19th century. In the 20th century, although Blackdom existed as a town for a brief moment, self determination and how to achieve it were exemplified in the experiment. Significant to the Black and ambitious, Blackdom townsite was a proof of concept for how to deliver on the promise of God's sovereignty. In practice, in practice, Blackdomites pooled indigenous land to build a 10,000 person all Black municipality in what had become Chavez County after the assaults on indigenous peoples had resolved into a reservation situation. The Mescalero Reservation is where Blackdom is, as well as Roswell, Artesia, Carlsbad. We can go. At the core of their movement was the exploitation of indigenous land through the homestead process. In 1900, Black people totaled less than 200 in Chavez County, and most of them were represented at the beginning of the scheme. From the state of Washington to South Carolina, Blackdomites advertised the organization of Afrotopia. On September 9th, 1903, Blackdomites had erected their corporate veil, and the Santa Fe New Mexican reported the incorporation of the Blackdom Townsite Company and its articles of incorporation with the names of 13 men and their intentions. Isaac Jones, Blackdom Townsite Company's first vice president, began his homestead in April of 1903. In 1905, Isaac Jones became the first Blackdomite co-founder to complete a homestead. The basic process took 3 to 10 years. In 1909, after minimal participation in the colonization scheme, Blackdom was revived as a way to mitigate the impact of New Mexico's impending statehood and the shift from federal to local power. Blackdom's elite owned land, but owning land wasn't enough to realize their Afrotopic dreams. Located 20 miles south of Roswell, up 285, Blackdom was a small enclave of land-owning Black people. Blackdomites needed a collective action to deliver on the promise of their intersections. During Blackdom's revival after 1909, Blackdom included the significant striving of Black women as they began participating in the homestead class more fully. Maddie Moore, Pernicia Russell, Ella Boyer, these were a few of those who chose to engage the world as part of Blackdom's homestead class. Blackdom's growth intensified with passage of the Homestead Enlargement Act of 1909. The township increased enough that Blackdomites organized a school and reached out to the territorial government for curriculum. Revival included educating the next generation by also projecting an intersectional Blackness from behind the Du Boisian veil of their municipality. For 2 years, Harold Coleman, a newspaper adsman from back east, led the advertising campaign published in the Crisis magazine. Separate and equal, Blackdomites projected intentional Blackness and God's sovereignty. After a few privileged Black travelers reported back to the migrating, ambitious Black masses, Blackdom became a beacon for the illuminated. In revival, Blackdom became a place, a real place, and more than a real refuge. Blackdomites preferred farmers to city folk for the sake of increased production. Everyone was required to adjust to the steep learning curve of dry farming. The agricultural society was a community set on living by God's divine law of sowing and reaping. Seed time and harvest time were different on desert prairies, but the ambitious frontier scheme was refined into a process with predictable outcomes for investors. In 1914, as a signee for Maddie and Pernicia, Frank Boyer completed the land patent for Blackdom's 40 acres town square. On August 11th, 1916, the Rio Grande Republic reported George Malone was admitted to the New Mexico bar and identified as the first Negro to do so. Blackdom's revival backdrop included the Mexican Revolution raging in the borderlands as the U.S. entered into World War. Pushed to the forefront, Black children were conscripted into military service. People under the conditions of American Blackness, patriotic to a separate but equal system, Blackdomites put the future of the small village on hold and shifted their activities 20 miles north into Roswell. Up 285. Meanwhile, in Roswell, Mittie Moore went from famous and hypervisible to infamous. As patriotism fueled the war effort, the new era became a rationalization for raids on her body business on 201 South Virginia Ave. During the shift to Roswell, the image of Black people was under assault across the world with D.W. Griffith's Birth of a Nation. Black bodies were under constant threat in the second wave of the Ku Klux Klan. In Roswell, the Roswell Daily Record, Roswellian leaders advertised the showing of Birth of a Nation and offered lectures on Americanism, which was grooming for incorporation of a Klan chapter in the city. Mittie Moore Wilson became the antithesis of the new patriotic fervor of the citizen soldier. She occupied the Black female public image in the region. Meanwhile, on July 21st, 1917, the Roswell Daily Record reported Ezel Ragsdale had been drafted from the unincorporated Afro-frontier town, and the family prepared him for deployment, which included putting his homestead process on hold. The women of Blackdom did their part in a few ways, on a few fronts. One of their major tasks was to diversify the Black female image in Chavez County. The women of Blackdom hosted a few inter-ethnic bandage knitting parties for the troops on the front lines. Curiously, the women of Blackdom staged the intersectional gathering in the window on Main Street in Roswell. Nevertheless, in the fall of 1917, Mittie led the headlines on trial for attempted murder of her fiance. John Wilson aggravated her enough that she pulled out her revolver and shot 2 holes in his coat, missing him completely. The police thought they had her, but she got off. Mittie was on the margins of Blackdom society, and Blackdom women were in her periphery. Mittie stayed unaffiliated, prior to 1919, even though she began to homestead in 1915, 3 miles south of Blackdom town square. She needed witnesses to vouch for her homestead progress under the threat of federal perjury charges, and the new Blackdom leadership legitimized her claim in 1919. In the spring of 1922, Mitty completed her final homestead proof for a whole square mile. And by the summer, Blackdom sold their church and the town faithful migrated outward. Ella and half the Boyer family moved to Vado. Although there was an exodus from Blackdom after 1919, the town business was stronger than ever. The next generation took over as America entered the roaring 20s in post war euphoria. December 31st, 1919. Extra, extra, read all about it. The Roswell Daily Record reported Will Pool acreage. Blackdomites incorporated the Blackdom Oil Company and set the Agricultural Society on a path towards oil exploration. I focused in on the narrative of Blackdom because as we look into bringing anti-racism to the fore, we need to understand the postscript, what to do after. And so Blackdomites kind of provides that model. And I think we have more tools now. And so I'll just hand it over to um, Daryl and the rest of the panel.
Well, thanks so much, Dr. Nelson. I think it's just you and me